Hey guys, Adam here. We are going to talk about my favorite car in iRacing today, the Porsche 992 Cup. I am filming this video at the end of 2023 Season 3. Hopefully when Season 4 patch drops, we do not see a big update for this car. If we do, I will review and maybe just publish a whole new video. If not, I would be grateful if I didn't have to redo this again. But over the last few months, I have spent a lot of time really learning this car, the ins and outs, and how to set it up. And because this channel was set up to help the sim racing community, that's what I want to do. I'm going to share all of this information with you, and it'll be a good refresher for me in case I ever take a break and want to come back and the car's still relatively the same, but I don't see that happening. So we're going to do this video in 3 parts. I'll put bookmarks down below if you want to skip ahead. Part 1, we're going to talk about software settings for pedals, wheel, iRacing. Part 2, we're going to talk about the fixed setup car, brake bias adjustments with that, and how to adjust your driving style to best work with the fixed setups in this car. And those driving style adjustments really carry over, and you'll see even more benefit with the open setup, where we're going to talk about how to tune the car specifically to your driving style. Now, I've seen 2 schools of thought on tuning this car. I subscribe very heavily to one camp, but I do understand the reasoning behind the other theories for setting up this car, but I just find that that doesn't quite work for me. So let's go ahead and let's dive into the software now. All right, so I've got the VRS Direct Force Pro config tool up, and I am running linear brake and linear throttle. I was running a bit of an S-curve on the brake, but I found that that really wasn't helping. It was hurting more than not because I couldn't quite get that trail braking value that I was looking for. And to trail brake in this car, you want to be around 10 to 15%. I mean, really 8 to 12% is more ideal for trail braking. And when I had that S-curve, I couldn't quite get that. Like right now, I'm betting I'm about 10%, and I'm not even looking at the value because I'm just used to it. My brake pedal is absolutely stock as it comes from the factory with 2 exceptions. I've swapped out the blue spring for the red, and the adjustment rod has been changed to 30 millimeters when measured from inside to inside of each of the 2 nuts that you use to lock down the eye bolt ends, or whatever those things are called. I'm misspeaking on the term. But what I found was that that adjustment rod length was much more effective for me in kind of allowing me to get that proper trail brake zone without having to have an S-curve built into the software. So it's straight linear. The other thing I will tell you that I do, since we're speaking about brakes, is I do not restrict the braking force in iRacing. I've seen a lot of videos. The first one I found was by Dan Suzuki, and I did follow his methodology there for a while of, you know, calibrating in iRacing to 100%, but then adjusting the file so that you were only ever getting a max of 80% to prevent you from locking up. In this car, you can still hit 100% brake force without locking up if you brake correctly, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But what happens is if you restrict your brake force to only 80%, if you're coming down to turn 7 at Sebring, the hairpin, if you're braking at 80% and I'm able to go to 100%, I'm going to outbrake you in that corner every time because you're going to have to hit the brakes much earlier than I will, and that's going to cost you a lot of time. Now, I understand if you're using non-load cell pedals that can be difficult to do, and if that's the case, if you are not using load cell pedals, try to tune the maximum brake force to as much as you can possibly get before you find yourself locking up the brakes all of the time. It might be 85, 90%. It all depends on how sensitive your foot is. I know a guy on Logitech pedals who is a far better braker than I am with my VRS pedals. So it is possible, but you do have to develop that muscle memory. So that is that part. Let's jump over to SimuCube True Drive. Now I have published this. It is Adam Hart P Cup V2. If you are on the True Drive paddock, you can go ahead and just download this. You don't even need to bother to follow what I'm about to do. But let me explain why I did what I did. I originally started with Daniel Morad's GT3 profile. I found it to be really good for most cars, actually, even for high downforce cars. It was wonderful. But I was doing a practice session with a buddy of mine in the Porsche Cup, and he made a comment that never occurred to me. And he said I was driving the car as if I couldn't feel what it was doing. And something about that caused a light bulb to go off in my head. And I was like, yeah, he's right. I really couldn't feel what this car was doing. And part of that is because the front end on this car is so super stiff that it is almost numb, where you can't tell what's happening. So I started playing around with all of the settings here in True Drive to get the best feeling out of the car. And what I found is that turning almost everything off, really just getting that raw force feedback feeling from iRacing right into my wheel really kind of helped with that. The only thing I have done is I have added damping to 30% just to prevent wheel oscillation when going down the straight if I have to take my hand off because I sneezed or something. And then I put the reconstruction filter up to 1. I preferred it at 0, but what I found was that there was a couple of corners on certain tracks where all of a sudden the steering would feel a little notchy. And it was just enough to where it caused a distraction and I would just kind of lose focus for a moment. And if I'm in a battle and I'm racing somebody else, I didn't want that distraction. So I turned the reconstruction filter just up to 1. I'm never going to go any higher than that because then I start to lose some of that feeling because it becomes almost too smooth and a little artificial, if you will. But yeah, just if you have a SimuCube Pro or Sport, you should be able to go copy these settings, download it from True Drive Paddock, and give it a go. Let me know if this has helped you in any way if you do try out this profile. Now over to iRacing. We are going to look at what I've got set up here. So wheel force is set to 25 Newton meters because that's the max that the SimuCube 2 Pro can do, and max force at 36. This came out of the auto function. I've left it there. Now, admittedly, it's a little high, but I like the higher force feedback feeling. I do not have sensitive hands because there's nothing else other than the feedback out of the wheel to tell me what is happening with the car, well, that and audio cues. So I want the higher force feedback. If you are able to run lower force feedback, maybe set this to like 48 to 50 Newton meters, good for you. I wish I could do that because it's less exhausting. But I can't. Now, on the topic of linear mode is a built-in smoothing into iRacing. I prefer it with the direct drive wheel. I found that when linear mode was unchecked with the direct drive wheel, the lower end force feedback kind of became a little more amplified, and I didn't really need that. But I recommend if you're using like a belt drive, like a Fanatec CSL or a G29 from Logitech, try unchecking linear mode. I've talked to a number of drivers who use the Fanatec CSL, and they've found that not having linear mode checked has really helped them find more feeling from the car, particularly this one. Now, the other thing, as I lean over my dash so I can see the monitor, is the audio cues. You'll see a lot of these are turned down with the exception of the tires. It does take away from the immersion, being able to hear the tires as well as I can now. But what I found is that after a while, I was really able to tune my ears to that tire sound from iRacing, and I could learn that, nope, I can push harder here, or I'm pushing just a little too hard here. I better back off before I lose the car. It's really hard to describe what that actual sound is, but after enough laps, you'll be able to really get the hang of it and kind of tune your ears to that sound. Okay, so that covers software. Now you notice I am at Silverstone. This is Legacy Silverstone. This is the 2008 track. And the reason I really like the 2008 track is because it has a very wide variety of corners that really show the strengths and, more importantly, the weaknesses of this car and how we can change our driving style to affect that and how to get faster lap times. Now, I've got the Silverstone baseline set loaded up. So we're going to go ahead and jump into this car, and I'm going to show you a few things that you can do to get faster with the fixed setup. All right, so here we are. We're in the car, sitting in pit lane right now because there's a couple things I want to talk about before we go out on track. The baseline setups are notoriously understeery. They're not bad, but they do understeer way too much for my liking. So we have to make some adjustments to our driving style to counteract that understeer. And there's a few things we can do that really help carry over to the open setup series that require us to do this a little less accurately, but still require it nonetheless. So the first thing we can do with the fixed setup car is we can adjust the brake bias in the car. Now, by default, if you're looking at the screen in the car, the default brake bias for this set is -649, or if you're looking at the black box, 43.5. Now, I know because I've driven enough laps in this car that that is a little too far forward for a track like this. In fact, for most tracks, if I'm being honest. So I'm going to roll this back to 7.47 or 42.5 on the black box. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because this is a Porsche. It's got a lot of weight over the back tires. We can brake heavily in this car and not be too concerned about locking up the rear tires. Now, there's a difference between braking heavy and like braking hard. So what I'm talking about is when you're approaching, let's say, turn 7 at Sebring, that hairpin, it is a very heavy braking zone. You need to slow the car way down. But what you never want to do with this car, because you always want to try to keep it balanced, is you never want to go from 0 to 100 on the brake pressure. If you look at the telemetry logger I've got on screen, you'll see that 0 to 100 is bad. If you stab the brakes, you're going to take the weight off of the back end. You're going to put a whole lot of weight on the front, more than the tires are capable of handling, and you're going to lock up all fours and you're just going to slide right off the track. So what we want to do with the brakes, we can still get to 100% brake pressure if we need it, but we want to be smooth on the brakes. So we're going to brake just a little earlier than you probably would like to in this car, and you want to be smooth on the brakes. And even more importantly with this car to keep it balanced is how you come off of the brakes. You can be a little more aggressive getting on, but because this car is inherently understeery, even sometimes with the open sets, you want to be really smooth off the brake. You want to constantly be holding a little bit of brake pressure. You want to ease off of it because that's going to help keep weight over the front tires, which is going to help add grip to the front tires, and that's going to allow the car to enter the corner a lot easier without you having to really try to crank the wheel over to try to counteract some understeer, or maybe brake a little harder to slow the car down more. So remember, you can be quick on but smooth, but you always want to be smooth and easy off the brakes. You want to kind of keep some weight over those front tires. Now, a lot of this should be, nothing new. These are things that apply to most race cars, whether it's real world or sim racing. But the other thing you can do in this car that's a little different from most is once you've hit the apex, you're off the brake, you're ready to get back on the throttle. It's a split second there. You never want to go full throttle with a tight corner. Now, large, big, sweeping corners, yeah, sometimes you can do that, and that's okay. But with this car, what happens is if you do that, even with the warm tires and high grip conditions, you're going to cause the back end to just completely break loose, and it's going to spin around on you, potentially wrecking yourself and somebody else who's near you. So one of the tricks you can do in this car is if you were smooth coming off the brakes, you kept some weight on the front end. Because you've kept some weight on the front end, it hasn't fully transitioned to the back yet. Stabbing the throttle like that is going to cause the rear tires to just spin. We don't want to do that. We want to keep the car balanced. So if we're coming through a first or second gear, a tight corner, we can go up to 50, maybe 80% throttle, and just kind of hold it there. Just let the car brake free rotate without completely coming loose on you. It's a very tricky thing to learn and to get right, but once you do, you'll find that the car exits the corner so much quicker and so much easier because you've allowed the rear end to just kind of step out without completely throwing itself out and then losing control of the car. So once you've kind of got the car rotated and pointing the direction you want, from there you just smooth back up to 100%. Smooth is key in this car. Quick steering inputs, not good. You're going to cause the car to lose control. Smooth is fast. You always want to keep that in mind. So let's go ahead and let's head out through Maggots and Beckett's on a cold tire lap. Now, if you're coming through a complex like Copse into Maggots and Beckett's, where it's not a heavy braking zone, you're just kind of, you know, lightly on the brakes, and you find that the car is understeering, that's a good time to roll the brake bias back. Now there, if you're looking at the telemetry, was in 4th gear. Normally I'd probably take that corner in 3rd, but it was a quick throttle up to 80%, let the car catch up. And do the same here. Now, this is a heavy braking zone. Smooth on, smooth off, keep some weight over the front tires, still lets the car rotate through the corner. I struggle through there on cold tires. Again, coming up to another heavy braking zone. We're going to be smooth on, smooth off, quick blip of the throttle with an off track. Tight corner. All right, so that was a combination of two things there. That was cold tires on the first lap, me trying to quick up to roughly 50-60% throttle, but I went a little too much and the rear end broke free. Now with this car, because the tires are very temperature sensitive, we're going to be a little slower through Copse because we will have lost some grip. Okay, into Maggots and Beckett's, light braking zone. Onto the throttle, hold for a little bit, and then go. Kind of do the same thing with this corner. Just on the brake still, holding some weight over the front. Short shift to help maintain grip on the exit. Another heavy braking zone. Smooth on, smooth off. Now, I probably got the brake bias a little too far forward through here. Too far back, I should say. So we'll move it up a couple of clicks. And let's see if we're still able to carry all of our speed. I was a little hesitant with the throttle there because I started to feel the back end go, and I am awful at counter steering when the back end starts to go. So my go-to is to just get off the throttle. Holding that throttle. Again, holding it, now.
That was your fastest lap of the session.
We got some heat in the tires, we can push a little harder. And I pushed too hard and really screwed up. Alright, but I am going to do real quick what happens in the heavy braking zone and why you don't want to get hard on the brakes. I mean, you do, but you don't want to be 0 to 100. I went 0 to 100, broke at the same spot I did there last time, and it caused it to lock up. So let's go ahead, let's jump out of the car now. Let's get to the setup menu. We kind of have an idea as to what the car's doing. Let's talk about how we can fix that with the open setups. All right, here we are, out of the car, in the garage, and we're ready to make some setup changes. So I do everything by feel now. I no longer take the time to go into Motec and look at all of that data. It takes too long. I'd rather do it this way. It's faster, especially for a car like this where it's very simple. If we're talking a 24-hour race, then that might be different. But even then, I'd be hard-pressed to try to load this telemetry data into Motec. So let's take a look at the garage. Let's talk about the car. We know how it feels right now. We know that the car is understeery, especially in high-speed corners. We know that the car is not aggressive enough at turn in. And we know that the car is kind of lacking in rear end grip, corner, mid corner, and especially at exit. So we've got a few things we need to work on with this car. And how do we get there? Well, the first thing, and kind of like the biggest thing, especially at a track like Silverstone where there's a lot of high speed corners, is that high speed understeer. We need to get that out of the car first. Now we've got a couple of ways we can do that. Now, option A, and the quickest one to go to, and what I would recommend doing at a high-speed track like this, is just take the wing and drop it down to its lowest setting. In this case, we're going from 5 to 4. If this were a lower speed track, let's say Olton Park or Rudskogen, or one of the many other smaller tracks on this service that aren't real high speed, I might leave the rear wing alone and I might adjust the aero balance of the car by changing the ride height. If you lower the nose and raise the tail of the car, you're taking the aero balance of the car and you're moving it forward. Opposite of that, if you raise the front and lower the rear, you're moving the aero balance backwards. backwards. Now this car is inherently understeery because the front end is set up way too stiff in this car. So I don't ever see a time where you're going to want to raise the rake, raise the nose, and lower the tail of this car. If you're raising anything, it's going to be the rear end, and you're going to lower the front. Now, a lot of the baseline setups already have the front pretty much as low as you can go, so your only option is to raise the rear of the car. And what happens when you do that is it's similar to reducing the wing, but it has a slightly smaller effect to the aero balance of the car than just simply dropping the wing down a click. But what it also does is it moves the weight balance of the car minimally forward. It doesn't have a very big effect, but it does kind of like help the weight get more on the front tires. So in this case, because this isn't a low to medium speed track, I'm going to leave the ride heights alone from the baseline setup, and I'm just going to go ahead and drop that wing down to 4. Now what I highly recommend is if you're new to this, one change at a time. Drop the wing, go run some laps, see what you're thinking, how the car feels, come back. If taking the wing down to 4 and you're still seeing a high speed understeer through cops and maggots and beckets, and it's just not getting around the corners, and you're doing all of the right things with the inputs, easy on the brakes, very slowly trailing off the brakes, quick input of the throttle to 80% or whatever that number is, and then rolling on to full. If you're doing all of those things and the car's still feeling understeery in high-speed corners, then what I would do is try to adjust the ride heights, maybe take the rear up a click or two and see how that works. Now, the other thing that I found that I want this car to do is to be more aggressive on turn in. And to do that with this car, the first thing we want to do is we want to go look at the toe on the front. Now, this right now, negative 1.5 millimeters, is actually toe out. The more toe out you run, the quicker the initial turn-in of the vehicle will be, but you will lose... not grip. Grip is the wrong way, but the car will become a little understeery on corner exit. But if you are, properly applying the throttle like you can do in this car with that, 50 to 80% for low speed to mid speed corners, and then rolling on once the car's rotated, you can use less steering rotation because you're using the back end to help you. You don't have to worry about that exit understeer as much when you start adding more toe out. Now, there are a few tracks where I will run as much as like 3 to 3.5 millimeters of toe out, and in those cases, corner exit becomes a little bit more difficult to manage, and the aero balance of the car needs to be more looked at, and the rear roll bar needs to be stiffer to kind of help with all of that, but those are few and far between. There is one track, Monza, with the oval, without the chicanes. North American Racing League ran there this past summer. It was absolutely epic. We actually ran toe in on those cars to help keep them stable going around the big oval. But other than that, I don't see a need to ever run toe in on this car because there just isn't enough bite on the front end. It's too stiff, and I don't think you're ever going to run into that issue. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the toe in, and I'm going to bump this all the way up to 2 millimeters of toe out. Just because this is my sort of default go-to on my baseline set is 2 millimeters of toe out. I run anywhere from like 1.5 to 2.5 depending on the track and how quickly I need to get the car to turn in, how much grip there is, but that's just me. So now the other thing I want to do is I want to be able to have the rear end hook up a little more on mid to corner exit. So the only thing we can do in this car, there's no springs, there's no dampers, we've only got roll bars. I'm going to take the rear roll bar down 2 clicks. And this should get me into a pretty decent range. Now, if I'm finding that the car is still having a high speed push, I might come back in and raise the rear a click or two. Or if it's a high speed push but under braking, like cops, for instance, I'm just going to roll the brake bias back on track and be able to make that adjustment there. Now, brief talk about camber and roll bars. The school of thought that I subscribe to when it comes to setting up this car is max camber, softer roll bars. When you run max camber, or as much as you possibly can, what happens is the car rolls through a corner, especially if you're running the softer roll bars, you increase that tire contact patch, giving you more grip through the corner. If you're running softer roll bars but less camber, it gives you a bigger contact patch, but as the car rolls through the corner, you kind of lose some of that inside contact patch. Now, depending on your driving style, you might find that less camber will work for you. If you are a very smooth driver, you're not hyper aggressive, you might find that less camber and stiffer roll bars is the way to go. There are a couple of tracks where I have run that and found it to be just as quick as max camber and softer roll bars. The other thing that's worth mentioning is if you're trying to work on a qualifying setup, stiffer roll bars can be really good with max camber for the first few laps. When the tires are cold, it can really help with grip. It's just something in the iRacing physics engine that's allowing that to happen, even though really it shouldn't. But it does. Longer races, though, you're definitely going to want to run softer roll bars. At least I do, because it helps with tire wear. And these tires are incredibly heat sensitive, so you want to try to be as easy on the tires as you can while still maintaining pace. And again, balance is key. So let's take a look. We've made two changes. We've added more toe out to make it more aggressive on turn in. We've taken the rear wing down to 4 to help with the high-speed aero push. And we've dropped the rear roll bar from 6 down to 4 to help get more speed on mid-corner, or more grip mid-corner and corner exit on the back end. Now, rear toe is also something that you can play with. I don't change it too often. Usually 0.1 millimeters of toe in is about what I run everywhere. The more toe in that you run, the more grip you will have on corner exit, but you will also induce a lot of understeer that's hard to offset by that push of the throttle to 50 to 80% and then smoothing on, because the rear will have so much grip that that much throttle input can't overcome it. So if you find that you're really struggling to keep the back end planted on corner exit, maybe add a couple more clicks of rear toe in. I don't know that going to toe out is worth it unless you've got a ton of traction. Going to toe out on the back end will cause the rear end to really rotate on corner exit. And you can really get this to the point where it's like you're driving a forklift, and I don't think that that is the way to go. But it might work for you. Try it. Let me know in the comments if you find yourself running toe out on the back. I would love to know what your setup is. If you think it's fast, I will happily try it. So let's go ahead. Let's take these couple of changes. We've only made 3. Let's go out on track and see what we think. Now already, right out of the pits, cold tires, through Maggots and Beckett's, I'm feeling that high-speed push is no longer there. I'm feeling more rear grip on corner exit as we drop that roll bar. And I'm feeling the car more aggressive on turn in with the additional toe out. And through there, the car turns in so much easier. I'm able to hold the corner And here as well. Taking it in third gear now instead of second. I'm carrying more speed. Alright, so one lap is not enough to really get some heat in the tires. But look at that. Look at the delta. A couple of quick changes. And if I didn't screw up maggots and Beckett's. No, our previous best with the baseline was a 52.1, I believe.
Left of the session.
And with just a couple of adjustments, going from the baseline to those changes, we went from a 52.1 to a 51.7. And I'm just being a little too aggressive with the car right now. But I mean, 3/10. Just a few clicks. All right, one last thing I want to talk about with this car. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to reset the car real quick. I want to talk about starts. I am using my Porsche Cup wheel. So I don't have a clutch. I don't have a clutch pedal down there. So what I am using, I'm going to go out here. I don't want to get any heat in the tires. All right, we're just going to go right here. So I am using anti-stall clutch in the options menu because I don't have a clutch. I'm not even assigning a button to a clutch. If you have a wheel with dual clutches on it, that is absolutely the fastest way to launch this car at the start of a race, if you can do it right. And what I found with this car is that I couldn't do it right every time, and I didn't have the patience to test it and keep practicing it until I got it right. So what I do, because this is consistent every time, and honestly, I'd rather have the consistency than have that speed, and more often than not, this gets me a position or two off the start of the race, is once the lights come on, 100% brake, full throttle, and as soon as it goes green, just let go. Is it the fastest? Absolutely not. But does it work for me? Every single time. Don't drive maggots and beckets like I just did there. But that is how I start the car at every race because I don't have a clutch. Don't have a dual clutch. I do. I have my Grid MPX, which I use for everything else but Porsche Cup because I'm going to use the Porsche wheel with this car. But because I don't have that, and this works. So you use that. Try that out. There's another method that I did play with for a bit, which was binding a button on my wheel as a clutch input, and then going back into the config file and editing the max to where it was like 57 or 48%. I forget what the optimal bite point is in this car, just because I don't use it that way. So there we go. That's it. That's what I've got for you today. This has been my knowledge that I have accumulated on how to set this car up. It's a very simple car to set up, and as you saw with just a few clicks, we gained 0.3 of a second on a very fast track. Now, with more time and more testing and just me getting to know this layout better, because I don't really ever run this layout, I could probably easily get down, knock another half a second off that lap time, but the setup already feels good. So any additional time I'm going to find here is just going to be me getting better at knowing the track, knowing the braking points, getting my muscle memory built in for throttle and brake, and just building from there. So I hope this video helped you out today. If it did, please let me know down in the comments below. If you've got questions, let me know. And if you think I said something completely wrong, because I probably have, let me know. I know that I'm not perfect and I can always do better too, but that's all I've got. So yeah, just remember, we're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time. So be cool to each other out there, and I'll see you in the next video.